Competition Commission's preliminary findings on its market inquiry based on passenger transport suggests that government should subsidise minibus taxis and also establish a special police unit to monitor the industry. The Commission's market inquiry started in June 2017 and has shown that 66.5% of commuters in the country rely and use minibus taxis, while buses and trains were responsible for 23.6% and 9.9% respectively. Let's talk about this to the Commissioner of the Competition Commission, Tembinkosi Bonakele. Good to have you. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for inviting me.
So, quite interesting findings coming out of this. I suppose nothing that we didn't know about, but it's the recommendations that we need to look at right now. Since 2017, this has been ongoing, so it's taken you quite some time. What were the challenges in doing this?
It's quite a complex sector, this, because it comes to us as a competition issue. But if you think about it, it's a very serious public policy issue. So it came to us as like taxis saying the playing field is not level, buses are getting subsidies, we don't, and it's therefore anti-competitive. And that's how we got in. But as soon as we got in and delved into it, it became clear there were issues around, the public transport system itself, subsidy policy. There were issues about safety of commuters and operators themselves. So quite a convoluted set of circumstances that apply in a sector in an inquiry like this.
It really is. And then, there's a lot of findings that come out and a lot of recommendations. So I'd like to break into those recommendations, because that's really what you're here to discuss, is what your findings are, what you have recommended. These are now open for discussion. And then once those are all through, you will then pull out the final findings. So some of the recommendations is that the minibus taxi industry should be subsidized. This is a big talking point. So currently, it's sitting on about 1% on subsidizing. Talk to us about
I have
that.
to clarify that's just the taxi recap, the taxi recapitalization, where they take old taxis and that are going to be scrapped.
So that's for safety and all of those things.
Pays them a little bit of money, and that constitutes about 1% of the total subsidy. The bulk of the subsidy goes towards trains as well as buses.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, a lot less people travel by trains, commute through trains in South Africa. It's less than 10% of the population. Now, it means that if that's your major sector that you channel of subsidies, a lot of the people, 66% are not touched by that subsidy. Also, a lot of small towns don't have access to rail. So if your subsidy is through a rail system, you are not touching people in rural areas, peri-urban areas. You are restricting that to metros. So there is some inequity there. Whilst we cannot prescribe to government as to what form the subsidy takes, we're calling upon it to have a policy, a clear subsidy policy that would be equitable.
Yeah. Let's dwell on the taxi industry for a while. Do you believe that by subsidizing the taxi industry, there'll be some fundamental changes that take place? Because the taxi industry is always something that many people talk to, and the safety is always discussed, the abandonment of using rules on the road, the taxi warfare over routes, and all of these things, always at the heart of things that are discussed. But an industry that, as you rightfully say, transports about 67% of South Africa's population. And this is a massive amount that use public transport. So do you think this will assist in changing this industry?
Yes, the taxi industry cannot be ignored. I think this is the point, and it's got to be modernized, and it's got to function professionally. So you have a lot of problems, for example, fights over routes and so on. You have problems about permits and licensing. All of those things are in our report, and we're saying they need to be sorted out. The issue of how do you subsidize them, we've left it to government. For an example, I know that there are some people, including the taxi industry itself, that says subsidize the consumer, because a lot of people who are far away from places of work were placed there through spatial planning, a result of the apartheid past. So those people have got to be subsidized in order to be able to come to work. Other people are saying subsidize them, put the money in their hands so that they can choose which mode of transport. The only point we're making is that you've got to have a policy and have in mind a system So often you don't want to have, so we've said, for example, you have to watch also that you need scale and efficiencies. And sometimes even competition has to give way towards this. So you've got to look at which is the most efficient means of transporting people from their homes to places of work every day.
Yeah.
It could be taxis, but yes, sometimes it could be infrastructure for other modes of transport.
Indeed, and I think what you are saying is that there really is, compared to the ridership figures that you've come out with and the subsidy funding, it's completely skewed because
Yes,
it just doesn't work.
Absolutely. So that affects taxis, but it also affects other modes. So for example, in Gauteng, we've said that the subsidy that goes towards Gautrain is substantially higher than the subsidy that goes to Metro Rail.
What is the subsidy to Gautrain?
I don't have the figure with me now, but it's about 10 times what goes to Metro Rail.
And that doesn't make sense, does it? Because, I mean, when you look at the percentage of people that use Gautrain, I mean, what is it? It's a class. That is a absolute class distinction, and you highlight that in the report.
Absolutely. The idea was to remove cars from the highways. And what we're saying is that if you integrate the entire public transport system under the control of an authority in Gauteng, you're going to have a better way of integrating it, and you are going to have you're going to have equity on these subsidies, because when you take money from someone, you're putting it elsewhere. There are trade-offs, and there needs to be a single policy maker and decision maker who makes those trade-offs conscious of their implications.
So that was one of the other recommendations, is put the Gautrain as well as Metro Rail under the Gauteng provincial government. They must take over management of the Gautrain.
That's correct. We are calling for devolution of rail, which is something the Department of Public Transport actually came up with back in 1996 in a white paper they produced, and somehow was never implemented. In most cities in the world, the running of trains, commuter trains, is left to lower levels of government, local government, and where you don't have that capacity, provinces are better placed to do that, because it involves planning. If their signals are not working in Cape Town, you don't want them to be calling someone in Johannesburg to say there's a problem, trains are not arriving in time, and so on. So they are better managed at a local level.
Yeah. I want to get back to the taxis, because we still haven't wrapped up on that. I think we went off on a bit of a tangent, which is important, because that's one of the big recommendations. There's always taxi rivalry when it comes to the industry routes. One of your recommendations as well, which is quite a big one, is the complete removal of area restrictions. This is in Section 66 of the National Land Transport Act. And this is where we see a lot of rivalry coming in with different taxi bosses and fighting over the different routes. You're wanting to see this all change. Talk to us about the recommendation.
That's right. You see, what has happened is that you have e-hailing services that have come in. And e-hailing services,
like your Ubers, for instance,
like your Ubers, your Bolt, or what other people call Taxify, all of these don't have area restrictions. They operate anywhere. They drop passengers and they pick up people anyway. And if you look at taxis like meter taxis we have, they are not allowed to do that. They have to drop off a passenger and drive empty back into the taxi rank. Now, those restrictions, which are enshrined in the law, don't facilitate that these modes are able to compete with this disruptor, because e-hailing is a huge disruptor into the industry. So you've got to modernize your law to empower the old operators to be able to also innovate and operate better.
Yeah, nothing wrong with competition, which is a good thing. But they've got to be on an equal playing field. And
they've got to be on an
that's
equal
what you're
playing
saying.
field. You see, the option we have is we regulate the newcomers, the disruptors, your Ubers and Taxifies, in the same old ways, and we lose the efficiencies that they bring. Or we get our laws to evolve so that the old operators, the old meter taxi and the traditional taxis we have operate under entirely a new set of rules that would enable them a fighting chance against the new disruptors. I
mean, from what you've recommended, and the taxi industry is a massive industry, and I mean the responses that we've been getting. There have been a lot of responses from viewers, some saying that yes, you should subsidize it. Others saying, absolutely not. They're a law unto themselves. They can't be trusted. It'll just cause more fighting. And others are again picking up and saying, how much more can you tax the South African? We've got no money. We have no money to be able to now subsidize another industry. But the benefits of subsidizing the taxi industry, perhaps you can help us understand them to try and make people understand how it will better the industry if they are subsidized more.
You see, the taxis close a lot of gaps in our public transport system. So if there is a new community that springs up somewhere, the first people who are able to service that community with transport is usually taxis. But you would find that, subsidy doesn't mean financing the operator directly. You find that there's no taxi rank often. They would, try and find a spot, pavements, where they would be parking these taxis. A new shopping mall is built. There's no facilities, but it's taxis that ferry people into the shopping mall.
Yeah.
So somebody has got to be able to subsidize the infrastructure, but somebody has also got to make sure that the taxis are in good condition. So we've looked, for example, at their access to finance. Is one of the worst forms of motor finance you find is taxi finance. Interest of about 20%, default rates of about 45%. 45% of people who borrow money to buy taxis, they default on those loans and those taxis get taken.
Yeah.
So you can clearly see that it's not sustainable. So for the taxis to be modernized, to be safe, to be new, you need to find a solution to the problem. And the subsidy could just be one part of it.
Yeah. Also, your recommendation with all of this is to actually get a creation of an SAPS unit to police the industry. When you say the industry, you're talking to the taxi industry.
Yeah, we're talking all public transport.
So all public transport.
Yes, you see, if you take, for example, Gautrain, one of the things that people tell us attracts them to Gautrain is that it is safe to use.
Very safe. And they won't even let you chew chewing gum.
Now,
that's how safe it is.
Now, if you like that, everybody likes safety.
Yeah.
Right. So you've got to extend that to other forms of public transport. Metro rail, they need similar safety standards. Taxi people, you need to get patrols. You need to have visible policing within taxi ranks themselves. You can't have taxis, sometimes operators replace law enforcement officers. You can't have that. They patrol, they do all sorts of things. We say that the state must play its constitutional role, which is to make sure that citizens are safe. Because you can't compete. You can't even have competition if people must pay with their lives in order to be able to get into routes and compete. So it's a major issue. You can't have public transport without safety.
Listen, very important recommendations. We unfortunately have to leave it there for this morning, but I know that you talk a lot to the buses as well. We haven't even touched on the buses, and there's huge recommendations on that as well. Talking about PRASA being separated from auto packs and those kind of things. So if you want to read the full report, it is there. It is on your website.
That's correct, yes. If you go to the Competition Commission website, you will find the interim report there, and there's about a month that's open for comments until end of March.
Until the end of March, and then they'll take those into consideration and the final report will be out. Remember, these are recommendations and hopefully things will come out of it. Thank you so much for talking to us. Commissioner of the Competition Commission, Tembinkosi Bonakele, talking to us about the preliminary findings of their market inquiry into passenger transport. Let's take a break.